Okay, here's something we know from political science research. Congressmen are single-minded seekers of re-election. That's it. Whatever they're doing, whatever policies they're passing, whatever positions they're taking in the world, what congresspersons are doing is seeking re-election. And in every single 2-year election cycle, the entire U.S. House of Representatives is up for re-election. That means they are running all the time. They must be tired. Still at the table are MSNBC host Alex Wagner, MSNBC contributor Robert Traynham, Nathan Gonzales of the Rothenberg Political Report, and Democratic strategist Doug Thornell. Nathan, talk to me. What other races? So I know we've been all watching Elizabeth Warren and Scott Brown. What other races are the key races that if I'm at home and I live wherever I live, why should I be worried about races in these other places? What matters?
Well, even though the presidential race gets most of the attention, like you said, 435 seats are up in Congress. But really, when you boil it down, even though we hear about this anti-incumbent narrative, there are only 78 races that are truly competitive that have a chance of flipping from one party to the other. And that's actually a fairly large amount compared to the middle of the decade.
Right. But when it would be closer to 40.
Right.
Yeah.
And Democrats, they need a net gain of 25 seats, and they're going to have to win a handful in some key states, Illinois, California, and Florida. And I think on election night, if you're, the presidential race is over, you want to look at what the House and how Democrats are doing in those 3 key states, because that will, I think, show us who is going to be in control and what kind of Congress we're going to have for the next president, whether it's President Obama or President Romney.
And this is structural, right? Part of the reason that Democrats are facing particular challenges in these House races is because we had a 2010 census, right? And after that census, we also had a big election that led a lot of Republicans into these state legislatures. They started redrawing congressional districts in ways, all parties do it, both parties do it, right, that benefit Republicans. And so you actually have some Democrats who are both incumbents running against one another, right, in order, because there's fewer Democratic seats in some of these places.
Right. I mean, what Republicans, they won 63 seats in 2010, and what they did through redistricting is strengthen a lot of those seats and make it more difficult for Democrats to take over the majority this cycle. But it's true, some of these incumbents are drawn together. Next week in Pennsylvania with Mark Kritz and Jason Altmaier in Western PA is a big incumbent versus incumbent battle. But what's unique there is it's not a strongly Democratic seat, that
right.
Whoever wins there is still vulnerable to a Republican challenge. And it just, redistricting, it's one of the most chaotic and complicated processes that we have in this country, but it's so important, and I think most people don't realize how it can dramatically affect the election even before the election comes.
So let me also ask this. So if in fact we have a presidential election that is looking at safe red and safe blue states, and so if the Democrats and Republicans are not sending in their ground game into these states because these are safe states, how does that impact the down card?
Well, I think one of the things that happens with House races is that, early on these candidates really have to define, getting back to Tester point, really have to define themselves independent of everything else going on. And I think Democrats, when they were really good and successful in 06 and 08, they were able to recruit candidates in southern districts and more rural districts where they were able to define themselves as, people as part of that as part of that community. And they were also able to put together a very, very aggressive voter contact program that started early, and that's something that I know my friends at the DCCC are starting to get going right now. And you have to do all these things because in some of these districts you don't have the DNC, you won't have the RNC, you won't have OFA there, so you literally have to do it on your own. You have to build these campaigns out of scratch, and that's why the NRCC, the DCCC, the national committees, to some degree, the early part are very important.
But this is, I mean, wasn't this the genius of Gingrich? Was that when Gingrich, I know, I did, I just said the genius of Gingrich, but I mean when he was Congressman Gingrich, right, that what he did was to turn local races into national races through the contract contract with America. But is it possible for President Obama, for the Democrats in the House, to make this a national race on reproductive rights issues? Can we make these local races national?
Well, I think they're trying. I don't know if it'll work this time around. I mean, look, this will be a national conversation about the economy. I know the Democrats want this to be a national conversation about women's rights, but when it comes What?
Well, why do you think it's us that would want, that the Democrats would want that?
Because,
I mean,
just
because they're on better footing with it.
Well, based on the talking points, based on what you see out of the Democratic National Committee, based on the
that's from Republican-held state houses and Republican-held legislatures.
But what I find interesting is that when you take a look at the poll numbers, that's not the number 3. That's not on the top 3 issues of the American people. What is on the top 3 of people's issues is education, health care, and the economy being number 1. So understanding that, I think this will be a national conversation about the economy. And to both of your points here, the question then becomes is if I'm a member of Congress in Virginia, where perhaps maybe that state really matters at both the Republican and Democratic levels, I'm going to have probably President Obama on my side if I'm a Democrat, and I'm probably going to have Mitt Romney on my side if I'm a Republican. But to your point, if I'm in California or if I'm in Massachusetts, I'm on my own.
Yeah.
You know, we know
Virginia, Florida, you have lots of company from
absolutely,
the big guys.
and sometimes you want it and sometimes you don't. It really depends on, quite frankly, what kind of district you're running in. You know, look, members of Congress are all about running for re-election because politics is all local. We know that the national polls show that the congressional approval rating is at 12%, but when you ask that person about their local member of Congress, that number is much, much higher.
Right, everybody hates Congress, but they love their Congress.
But
Alex,
it depends on the member.
I'm going to give you the last word around this.
I think, you know, the thing we haven't mentioned is the decline of moderates. I mean, some of these folks are retiring because they just don't have the stomach for the fisticuffs, which is now legislating on Capitol Hill. It is always shocking to me that we have the defense triggers are going into place, the Bush tax cuts that need to be extended or not, unemployment insurance that needs to be extended or not, alternative minimum tax, all this stuff, big ticket items for Congress, none of it's going to get dealt with until the lame duck session of Congress. It is crazy that Congress no longer governs. Exactly, needs to do what Congress does.
Right, because, I mean, one should just sort of take one's lumps, but the role of being elected is to, in fact, to go.
But they're afraid of their bases. The Tea Party's afraid of the extreme right, and the Democrats are afraid of the extreme left.
People say they want bipartisanship or just get something done, but the voters aren't rewarding that with how they vote in primaries.
So, more in just a moment. I'm going to show you a story about how storytelling can be very political, but first it's time for a preview of Weekends with Alex.